Yo, what up, y'all? It's your boy Rob coming back at you once again with another live stream. So before we get started, you already know what to do. If you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure you hit the bell icon twice. Smash the like button, share this video out to all of your followers, and let's get it cracking. All right. So shout out to everybody who is in the room already. If you guys can hear me, give me a thumbs up. If you guys cannot hear me, then give me a thumbs down. I'm going to shout out the early birds real quick, and then we are going to get into this. All right. So shout out to my man, Lloyd Sky Nines. We got Denise Scales in the house. Shout out to Denise. We got Black Free Thinker in the building. Shout out to Tone. What's good with it, bro? We got Jesse in the building. We got Brooklyn Queen in the house. Shout out to Brooklyn Queen. We got Caldona in the house. Shout out to Caldona. We got Shamika Gray in the building. All right. And I think that is it. All right. So shout out to everybody who is here. It's good to see everybody. All right. So I got a question. There is a history that the United States as well as Canada has with boarding schools and quote unquote indigenous populations. Right. Shout out to Alonda. What's good with it, Alonda? Good to see you. So I did a video about the Canadian boarding schools, right? Now, the reason why I do these videos as they come out about these boarding schools is because I don't know if people are aware. Shout out to Black Spider. What's good with it? Good to see you, Black Spider. They keep finding these boarding schools, right? And the issue with these boarding schools is that all of these children are buried. And the United States doesn't really talk about it, and neither does Canada. If you're subscribed to Blacklight Revelations 1, there's a video on Blacklight Revelations 1 that talks about a British Columbian boarding school where 250 bodies were found of children. All right. And they don't talk about these boarding schools. Now, the reason why I bring up the boarding schools is for one, because when the United States always talks about the morals and the ethics and all of this nonsense, shout out to my man Zentober. What's good with it, bro? We always have to regress and talk about how there are no morals and there are no values here in this country. And these people here are not heroes. These people are some of the most disgusting and evil people in the world. And the thing is that a lot of what you see going on current day in schools today that's downplayed when we talk about it are things that have been going on since the beginning. Not even since the beginning of the United States, since North American colonization. You know what I'm saying? And we're going to talk about one instance of that situation here. All right. In facts, Tone, to decrease their population and to commit ethnic genocide. And yeah, facts, Black Free Thinker, the genocide schools. Expecting morality from a moral bankrupt nation is the first mistake. Facts. If you guys agree with Zentober, give me a thumbs up. If y'all disagree, give me a thumbs down. That is an absolute fact. All right. So what we have is an article from Colorado Politics. All right. And what it says is report dozens of Native American children died at Colorado boarding schools. Now, this is an article from October 5th. All right. So now the first question that people would probably ask is, well, how did they die? Shout out to Lloyd Scott 9. What's good with it, bro? Here's my question for you guys. How do you all think that they died? Let's talk about it. All right. So now here it's and another thing to get out of this as well is to pay very close attention to the process that's used to get this quote unquote rectified. Okay. So as you guys can see, there's an article over here. It says report details child deaths at Native American boarding school. Judge advances with suit against Griswold. All right. So we should actually check that out as well. I think that might actually have some interesting information in it. So now here's says a Colorado General Assembly commissioned report on the history of Native American boarding schools concluded that dozens of the children entrusted to those schools died under their care. Now that's interesting. First and foremost, one of the questions that probably wouldn't be a bad question to ask is how did these Native American, Native Indigenous children get to these boarding schools and why were they there? And shout out to Denise and who else was answering the Nightbot? Shout out to Brooklyn Queen for hitting the Nightbot. Appreciate you guys. Shout out to DJ Elmo. What's good with it, bro? Now, I know for a fact DJ Elmo was around for those videos that I did about Canada. Okay, so shout out to DJ Elmo. Many more children faced psychological or physical abuse, including sexual abuse, according to the report. Now, let me ask you guys a question. Is that still going on today? Are children still dealing with quote unquote sexual abuse at American public schools today? So you got to ask yourself the question, what has changed? The report, under the direction of Dr. Holly Catherine Norton, the state archaeologist with History Colorado, hints that there is much more that should be looked at, but the short timeline dictated by the legislator meant some things just can't get done. And some of the things the legislator asked for shouldn't be done at all. House Bill 221327 went into effect on June 1st of 2022 with a deadline for a final report of June 30th. The final report, 139 pages, was released this week by History Colorado, although tribal representatives and the Colorado Commission on Indian Affairs were given copies back in June. HB 1327 gave History Colorado a list of research projects beginning with events, abuse, and deaths that occurred at the Federal Native American Boarding School at Fort Lewis, which was located in nearby Hesperus and operated from 1880 to 1911. Now, I want you guys to pay close attention to this. This is being entertained by Congress, right? And there's nobody saying, well, how did that affect anybody that's alive today? Is anybody that was alive in 1880 alive today? And that's a fact, DJ Elmo. Big facts. The boarding schools were like a brainwashing assimilation to Eurocentric ideology. Facts. Facts. So a lot of the people that went through this, they're not alive today. But look at what's being done. This is actually being addressed. So you got to ask yourself the question, well, that's interesting, right? How is this being addressed? Shout out to Carla. What's good with it, Carla? How and why is this being addressed? Are the questions, right? So let's check out some more. And you guys know I'm in denial. You know what I'm saying? My computer is running kind of slow. And this page is really script intensive. So if you guys give me a minute, hopefully it'll come back up. While you guys are waiting, if you haven't smashed the like button yet, please take a moment. Make sure you guys smash that like button. Also, if you guys haven't hit the bell, please make sure you guys hit the bell. There we go. All right. If you guys can hear me, give me a thumbs up. If you guys can't hear me, then give me a thumbs down. I think it might still be running kind of slow. Okay, here we go. Let me see. Yeah, you guys should be able to hear me now. You guys able to hear me? Let me see. Okay, yeah, you guys can hear me. All right, and shout out to Carla for coming in and hitting that Stream Elements and Nightbot. The report noted 8 different schools that had Native American students between, again, peep the dates, 1880 and 1920, but focused primarily on Fort Lewis and Grand Junction Indian Boarding School, also known as the Teller Institute, which operated from 1888 to 1911. Okay. The projects included identifying and mapping graves of Native American students at Fort Lewis and off-campus cemeteries, to research Native American student victims at Fort Lewis, and to review written and recorded history, including oral history, that describe the experiences and trauma of students who attended Fort Lewis as well as their families. Okay. So again, I want you guys to pay very close attention to the dates, 1888 through 1911. All right. The latter task was one that was the most difficult to complete, the report noted. The history of the Fort Lewis boarding school was not recorded by students or their families, so researchers had to rely on government reports sent by the superintendent, which often presented only the best light or contemporary newspaper accounts. Now, let me ask you guys a question. Why did the government reports sent by the superintendents only present these schools in the best light? Why would they have done that? It's not like the mainstream media or the government does that today. Is it? They don't do stuff like that, do they? They objectively report the news, and if it's bad, they report the bad, and if it's good, they report the good, right? They don't do underhanded stuff like that. Now, do they? And also, guys, make sure that you guys watch this stream all the way through to the end, because it'll take you right into the next stream that I'm going to do. Okay. So now here it says the report noted, for example, that the almost complete autonomy by superintendents meant that they were able to weave their own narratives about everyday experiences of students under their care. And indeed, we see those stories pushed forward to Washington. Superintendents use these letters and the distance from DC to conceal internal issues, except the ones they wanted to bring to the attention of Washington. All right. So now what we have is these written accounts versus the government accounts, kind of like these accounts that they have nowadays of the quote unquote good slave, these PragerU history modules, right? As for oral histories, the report said that wasn't doable. Given the short time frame for the report, the need to intentionally approach oral history interviews from a perspective grounded in knowledge, history of the schools in Colorado, cultural sensitivity, and trauma-informed approaches, it was not a directive that could be accomplished responsibly this state fiscal year, the report said. So again, pay very close attention to when it says the state fiscal year. So now when they talk about the state fiscal year, what government did these people go to in order to get this thing started? Shout out to AB Promotions. What's good with it, bro? What part of the government did they go to? This would be state politics, right? State politics for this. Okay. The report also asked why the state government needed the oral histories at all. Since the two main schools researched for the report, Fort Lewis and the Teller Institute, had both closed by 1911, there are few, if any, living survivors of the school, the report said. In addition, family members of the survivors said their relatives did not speak of the experience. Oral histories should be firsthand accounts of survivors. I would caution that oral histories must serve a greater purpose than simply recording the trauma of an already victimized people who do not owe the state their emotions or stories, the report said. Now, here goes my thing, right? I'm not mad at them for putting this in here, right? My question is, when it comes to reparations, why doesn't the Congressional Black Caucus say that about our requests for reparations? What it sounds like to me is that this organization wants to get these indigenous people some type of repair, and the Congressional Black Caucus does not want that at all. Shout out to Kid Gravity Beyond. What's good with it, bro? Yo, I'm gonna be going live immediately after this stream. So if you want to hop on with me, because I'm gonna be going through a whole bunch of news articles, I'm probably gonna be grifting on this Israel versus Hamas thing the entire week. You know what I'm saying? So you already know. You know what I'm saying? So now here it says, in all, the two boarding schools enrolled students from 22 tribes, the report said. Now, here goes my question. Again, I don't know if you guys answered this or not, but I'm going to ask it again. How many people have heard about the history of the Canadian boarding schools? I'm going to the BJ's first. Pause. If you guys heard of the Canadian boarding schools, give me a thumbs up. If you guys have not heard about the Canadian boarding schools, give me a thumbs down. Now, the reason why I asked that, right, is because when it comes to the United States and when it comes to Colorado, it would have been the British who ran those boarding schools, right? The descendants of the British, right? In Canada, it was the French. So you got two different groups, right? You got two different groups of Europeans who did the same thing. But again, we're not supposed to look at this type of thing, you know, encounters and cultural genocide as part of the culture. So my question is, if that's the case and we're not supposed to look at it, then how is it that two separate countries, two separate cultures did the same thing? That's the question. Yeah. And shout out, and I'm so glad Professor Black Truth did that video about Israel, because it was a really good video. You know what I'm saying? And he said a lot of the same things that we were saying throughout our stream about it, and that we'll probably say again today as we look at a lot of this stuff. We're going to talk about this quote unquote intelligence failure. I'm glad Professor Black Truth also highlighted about Netanyahu being, under scrutiny and him trying to get rid of the power of the Supreme Court there. And now that's kind of not in question. You know what I'm saying? That's something that needs to be looked at. Shout out to DSB. What's good with it? Shout out to Black Bitcoin Key. What's good with you, bro? Shout out to John Guillory. What's good with it, bro? They believed and practiced the same principles. Facts, Carla. If you guys agree with Carla, give me a thumbs up. If you guys disagree, give me a thumbs down. Now, my question is, why don't we hear very much about this? That's my question. Why don't we hear very much about this? And now my thing is, when it comes to the native indigenous people, they be smacking up the government. They be smacking up the government, and they get a lot of they get a lot of reparations. And it's interesting how anytime anybody talks about reparations, they always, Joe Biden, he's always like, well, as long as the native indigenous people are included. I mean, I'm not somebody to try to, block somebody from getting some money. But my thing is, I don't understand why they need to be somehow woven into our claims. I mean, they doing pretty well on their own as far as getting broken off, which, I mean, they should. If you ask me, they should be getting broken off. You know what I'm saying? The government did them dirty too. You know what I'm saying? But I don't understand why they need to be wrapped up in ours. It doesn't make any sense. And people need to start really heavily rejecting that when you hear people like Joe Biden or people like Bernie Sanders do that kind of nonsense, because they do it all the time. And exactly, DSB, we weren't included in any of theirs. So why would, and we face different atrocities than they did. So why would they be included in ours? It just doesn't make sense. You know what I'm saying? So now here it says, in all, the 2 boarding schools enrolled students from 22 tribes, the report said. More than 65 students died at the 2 schools, the report said, ranging in age from 5, which was too young to even have been enrolled in school. So now you got to ask yourself why these 5-year-olds were even there, to 22, which the federal government said was too old to be enrolled. So why did they have the 5-year-olds and the 22-year-olds at these boarding schools? Does that make any sense whatsoever? Shout out to Donnie Side. What's good with it, bro? Do that make any sense? Think about that. Like, all of these variables that you hear, process them. Let them marinate. Think about it. See if they make sense or not. You know what I'm saying? The report sent to Washington never identified the name or even the tribal affiliation of the student who died. They were often referred to instead as, quote unquote, an Indian child, which we all know technically, right? Technically, the word Indian is actually derogatory, because when they came to the United States, they just started calling these people, quote unquote, Indians, because their navigation was off and they actually thought that they were in India. You know what I'm saying? Again, there goes that superior technology. You know what I'm saying? The superior technology, the superior navigation of believing that the world was flat, the superior navigation of believing that the sun was in the center of the universe, all of that superior technology. You know what I'm saying? There is no threshold where the death of children at the boarding school is acceptable, the report said. Every single death was a tragedy to the families who lost their loved one. This report seeks to contextualize what happened to these children and to understand not only the conditions within Fort Lewis and Grand Junction schools, but also the social, political, and other conditions of the 19th and 20th centuries. So let's actually talk about that briefly. What were the social and political conditions during the 19th and 20th centuries? What did that look like? Shout out to Val Williams. What did those conditions look like? Yeah, that's a fact. They did that, and in addition to that, some of them just flat out lied. You know what I'm saying? They just flat out lied. The Dawes Act. TD did a good video, I want to say maybe like 2 years ago, about the Dawes Act. You know what I'm saying? And I think he was talking about Elizabeth Warren. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not sure as far as if they were, quote unquote, mixed, as far as half Indian and half white. I'm not exactly sure. Shout out to Ronnie. What's good with it, bro? Probably, I wouldn't doubt that they weren't. They probably were. And if all of them weren't, probably like 50, at the least 50% of them were. This is not done to excuse any deaths or other impact on Native people subjected to these institutions. No child should ever die at school. Now, here goes my question, right? If they believe that no child should ever die at school, why is it then that so many of these boarding schools have such a bloody history? These boarding schools were literally like genocide sites. And again, if you ever run across any information about the boarding schools, I got a couple videos up about the Canadian ones. They're all over Canada and North America. You know what I'm saying? There's information out there about them. These things were very bad. A lot of children died. And you don't really hear very much about it because nothing bad was ever done ever. You know what I'm saying? Not everything was written down, the report pointed out. Superintendents who were both good bureaucrats and shrewd political players sent messages to Washington, D.C. complaining about lack of resources. Records covered personnel issues, equipment, and supply requests, but never children's names. The story, look at this, the stories of children crying as their hair is cut from the children as adults, not from the records of those doing the cutting. Now, let me ask you guys a question. What is the obsession with people's hair? We still hear about this hair terrorism today. Matter of fact, we just heard about some hair terrorism. Shout out to Torian Rain, if I'm not mistaken, in Texas. What is it with these people in hairism? You know what I'm saying? What is it? Seriously. And I think that that's a legitimate question. Now, it says the records talk about lice and hygiene, which is very, 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 very ironic, right? We never hear what happened to the items that are confiscated from the children. It is too easy to imagine that beaded moccasins or a special shirt are simply thrown away because those things weren't perceived as having value, but were rather evidence of a quote unquote dying race, the report said. So again, I want you guys to note the similarities. Let me ask you guys a question. Do you all see any similarities? Shout out to DJ Elmo. DJ Elmo says, obsession with hairism was a part of the eugenics movement, e.g. analyze the hair combing test. Yeah, facts. Facts, I agree. And I definitely agree with Val as well. They opened up these boarding schools to brainwash these children and rob them of their culture. They wanted them to accept European culture. Yeah. Yeah. Super facts. That's one of the reasons why, you know, I get kind of irritated when I hear people talk about quote unquote good hair. Like that really irks me. Like there's like, no, dude, no. You know what I'm saying? And that's all. Anybody that knows me, that's known me for a long time, they'll tell you that that's always been something that is kind of irritating to me. You know what I'm saying? I don't like that at all. That really irks me. You know what I'm saying? So now here it says daily life off the reservation boarding schools followed military-style institutions, the report indicated, with few firsthand accounts. This regimen was probably coerced, researchers found. The students were supposed to spend half a day on academics, primarily the 3 R's, reading, writing, and math, which again, none of these are R's. Reading, right? Writing, which writing begins with a W, and math, they used to say arithmetic, but it's arithmetic. I mean, if you can't even learn the names of the subjects right, clearly you're not going to really get a good education, but whatever. But reports from the 2 schools indicated that this didn't happen for a lack of teachers and other resources. So now if they weren't teaching or doing anything at the schools, then what is it that they were doing? Shout out to G Mars. What's good with it, bro? Good to see you. I ain't seen you in a minute. The schools instead depended on the students for facilities maintenance. Look at this, okay? Check this out. The schools instead depended on the students for facilities maintenance, construction of new buildings, irrigation, fences, and other infrastructure, laundry and sewing, cooking and cleaning, among other activities. These vocational skills were the primary focus of the curriculum, the report said, and they were also a source of free labor and maintenance. Yeah, exactly, Black Freethinker. Likely slave labor. You know what I'm saying? That's exactly what it sounded like. How the students got to school also raised red flags. In the school's early years, some students were kidnapped, the report said. Now, why are you kidnapping kids, bringing them to a school? Does that make any sense? Now, again, mind you, this happened. And I guarantee, and again, this is just Colorado. I guarantee you that this happened all over the United States. You know what I'm saying? This likely happened all over the United States. Parents or others with legal rights were supposed to give their consent, but that didn't always happen, and there were no consequences for the superintendents who were competing with each other for students and the federal dollars that came as a result, or for Native American agents. Okay? So it's always been politicization. You know what I'm saying? It's literally always been politicization. And again, what was the year? 1888. You know what I'm saying? 1888. Shout out to Mama Zeke. What's good with it? Congress finally intervened in 1893, requiring written permission as a way of demonstrating accepting the schools by American Indian parents, even if just in perception. Once a child went to a boarding school, it was difficult for the parents to get them back, the report said, adding superintendents and Washington, D.C. officials were reluctant to allow students to return home and often refused to pay the cost of doing so. So, I mean, this was basically like state sanctioned kidnapping. This was basically state sanctioned kidnapping. And real quick, ladies and gentlemen, shout out to everybody watching. We got 46 people watching. If everybody could take a moment, smash that like button. And also, if you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure you guys hit that bell and share the stream from wherever you're watching from. That'd be great. One superintendent reported a student who wanted to go home to see his sick mother, but refused to pay for it, claiming it would be a waste of money if the mother lived. And this is, this is just okay. Among the most horrific events was cutting hair. All right. So now in this particular society, right, Native Indigenous society, what they're saying here is that one of the most horrific events, one of the most traumatizing events was these children getting their hair cut against their will. But now when we talk about this kind of stuff and we talk about this hairism, terrorism that we got to deal with, for some reason, it's a laughing matter. It's a laughing matter. Newly arrived students, look at this. Newly arrived students would have been forced to have their hair cut, with reports of some teachers holding some students down, while the government claimed it was for quote unquote hygiene purposes. And again, the irony, right? The cutting heightened the psychological trauma for those students, the report said. Well, because they was getting held down and forced. You know what I'm saying? It was because they was getting held down and enforced. That would be psychologically traumatizing to a child. That would be psychologically traumatizing to anyone. Living conditions were poor, the report indicated. Now, why were the living conditions so poor if they were getting government funds? If they were competing for all of this government money, why were the living conditions so poor? Does that make any sense? That doesn't make any sense. They should have been using the money that they were getting to reinvest back into the school. That included neglect, unsanitary conditions, and poor nutrition, which resulted, look at this, which resulted in the sickness that often swept across schools, the report said. The Teller Institute had more problems with epidemics than Fort Lewis, the report noted. Those illnesses included pneumonia, tuberculosis, and in 1907, measles, scarlet fever, and smallpox. They had some serious stuff there. Students also faced psychological and physical abuse, including grape. Now, you guys know what grape is on YouTube, right? Why are you facing grape at a school? But again, you got to ask yourself the question, how many children are facing grape at the schools of today? Nothing really has changed much, except for we have a loop of propaganda that just attempts to make it look like everything is all good. In 1903, Polly Pry, a renowned Denver Post reporter of those days, broke an investigation about sexual abuse of girls and young women by a Fort Lewis superintendent, Thomas Breen, who was never prosecuted for those crimes. Now, here's the question. I mean, why was this guy, Thomas Breen, never prosecuted? Why was he never prosecuted? It seems like there's a lot of these situations where somebody is just never prosecuted. It is impossible to quantify the abuses that occurred at the schools, where students and staff had no recourse, the report said. Students also lost their native identities, according to the report. They were stripped of their native names for English names, a dictate from the federal government. I'm going to pause right there. What do you guys think about that? That never happened, right? Yeah, exactly. If you guys agree with John, sounds familiar. Give me a thumbs up. If you guys disagree with John, give me a thumbs down. Does that sound familiar? Students also lost their native identities, according to the report. They were stripped of their native names for English names, a dictate from the federal government. Student roles were, excuse me, almost entirely angelicized or given Hispanic names, the report said. Now that's interesting, right? Hispanic names in the 1800s? Huh. My question is, what is a quote unquote Hispanic name, quote unquote, in the 1800s? And real quick, shout out to DSB. We got the first stream sponsor with the $3 super sticker. Make sure you guys show him some love. Throw those radiation emojis into the chat. That's seriously, that's my question for everybody. Sometimes the schools gave students the names of famous peoples or even teachers at the school. Superintendents, particularly at the Teller Institute, weren't careful about identifying tribal affiliations of students. The report said about one superintendent that it reflected his absolute ignorance about tribal affiliations. Some students weren't even American Indian. In order to bolster enrollment and the federal dollars that came with it, sometimes the superintendents resorted to enrolling students with Mexican or South American heritage. And when they say Mexican or South American heritage, we're talking about the 1800s here. I believe that Black students would have been a lot more accessible than Mexican or South American students. So I guarantee you that you will see a lot of Black students in there. How were they getting Mexicans and South Americans in the 1800s, 1900s, early 1900s? The lack of accurate identity meant the graves of the students who died at the schools didn't include the tribal names. Most graves, however, are no longer marked. Now, let me ask you guys a question. If the graves did not have the tribal names anymore, that would make them a lot harder to find, wouldn't it? So this was all a very slick operation. This was a very smooth operation that they were doing here. It is reasonable to assume that the Fort Lewis Cemetery also had wooden markers at some point that have been lost to time, the report said. Finally, the report noted earlier work done by Fort Lewis College, including an acknowledgement by the college on the history of the Fort Lewis Indian Boarding School. The college has been working towards understanding the implications of that history and creating programs of reconciliation for both the college and the wider Durango community, the report said, adding those efforts that go back to 2017. Now, here goes my question. Why would the wider community need some sort of reconciliation? And why would the college need some reconciliation? It would sound like the people who were directly involved in this would be the ones that need the reconciliation, wouldn't it? And shout out to Denise, Brooklyn Queen, and Carla for hitting that stream element and the Nightbot. And shout out to Val also. Everybody that's hitting the Nightbot, appreciate you guys. And I gotta agree with, if you guys agree with Tone, give me a thumbs up. If you guys disagree, give me a thumbs down. They kidnapped by proximity. Yeah, that's facts. Today, Fort Lewis College is designated by the federal government as a Native American serving non-tribal institution with more than 10% of its student body Native American. The college enrolls around 1,400 Native American students each semester from up to 185 tribal nations. Eligible Native American students can attend the college tuition free. Now, I want you guys to pay very close attention, right? Do we have any institutions like that? And I agree, Ricky. They probably were Black Native American. Especially a lot of those kids that they claim were quote unquote Mexican and South American. I don't believe that. Where were you getting Mexicans and South Americans from in numbers to fill these boarding schools in 1888 and in the early 1900s? You know what I mean? So this is, again, Fort Lewis College, right, is designated by the federal government. Now, this is supposedly a native serving non-tribal institution. It's a native serving non-tribal institution. Only 10% of its student body is Native American. So who makes up the rest? Who makes up the rest of the student body? That's the question. You know what I'm saying? Who's making up the rest of the student body? In addition, the Colorado Department of Human Services also worked on an investigation of the Grand Junction boarding school, which now operates as the Grand Junction Regional Center. By the time HB 1327 passed, there had already been a multi-nation consultation about the Teller Institute, along with other conservations about appropriate methods of investigation, tribal ceremonies, and other matters relevant to the Fort Lewis and Teller Institute schools. All right. So now what I'm focused on here, right, is this Fort Lewis College. Now, let me ask you guys a question. When it comes to historically Black colleges, do attendees of historically Black colleges get to go there tuition free? That's my question. People don't get to go to historically Black colleges for free. So here is a reparation, right, that Native Indigenous people have gotten. And what I find fascinating is that they always make these suggestions of, oh, you know, Black people should get free college, and Black people should get free college, and Black people should get free college. And even though we are advocating for cash reparations, here's an instance where Native Indigenous people actually do get free college, right? But we don't have anything like that. So, like, my question for everybody is, when it comes to the atrocities that occurred with Black Americans, my question is literally, what has been done? What has been done? That's the question. So you guys can let me know the answer to that question in the comment section. Remember, don't move, because the next stream is going to start in about 15 minutes. Excuse me real quick. Oh man, I had to sneeze. Good Lord. All right. So just let this take you into the next, excuse me. Let this take you into the next stream. I'll be starting it in about 15 minutes. Please make sure you guys leave some comments. We're going to do a part 2 on this stream tomorrow, and I will catch you all in a few. All right. Peace.